So I'm delighted to have with me here at the Conservative Party conference Bob Lyddon. Bob is a man with a vast knowledge of payments. How long have you worked in the payment industry, Bob?
About 35 years.
35 years,
Yes.
and you're still young looking.
Absolutely. It keeps you young.
Yeah,
There's always new stuff
going on. Do you do
going
marathon running, I think? Do you do
I
marathons?
do half marathon.
Half marathons,
long,
yeah.
Yeah, quite long distance.
And what's your best time?
1:57 for a half marathon.
That's
So
pretty good.
I was delighted with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Smashed that this March in Cambridge.
Well done.
Yeah, thank
God,
you.
I'm not going to ask you your age. You don't ask that. You're a mature person,
I'm
though, I think.
mature,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
So what do you think about what's happening in the UK with cash today? Because we seem to be getting pushed by the banks and perhaps Visa and MasterCard towards a cashless country.
Well, we are, and it's no one thing. It's death by 1,000 cuts. You know, it starts when you get the check guarantee card withdrawn.
Yeah.
Then you can't pay in bulk checks. Then there's nobody apart from one or two suppliers, certainly not from banks, to collect checks and cash at business premises.
Yeah.
Then you get a machine where you can pay in one check at a time rather than writing them on the back of the deposit slip. You could have 20, 30 checks in
Yeah.
the same deposit. Now you have to sit there feeding them in one by one.
Yeah.
So it's all this done with if not necessarily the agreement of the FCA, but I think it is with the agreement of the payment systems regulator. They see their role as getting everybody onto digital, which needed to be challenged. It should be challenged in Parliament, because they're also regulating the check and credit deposit system, the clearing system.
Finger in every pie.
Well, they're meant to treat the different payment systems equally, but they've presided over the check and credit like being forgotten. Oh, push that into the corner. Let's worry about faster payments and backs. But hold on, why are Visa and MasterCard not forced to separate their scheme management company from the infrastructure, like Link were forced to? Why? Oh, why? Can you answer that, please? Well, they can't, because it never gets posed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so MasterCard owned the ATM system through Vocalink. This is conflict of interest or alignment of interest. And for the government, it's fintech all the way. And you know, they give out...
Just ask you about checks for a minute. For my sins, I was actually appointed by the UK Payments Council to head up the group working to end check clearing. I actually was made chair of that group.
Right.
And because I'm a very inquisitive person, when I was made chair, I said to the people on the Payments Council, the staff there, I said, well, I'd like to know what fraud is and connected with checks. And do you know what? They couldn't answer me. They did not have a separate figure. And yet, there was all the publicity being generated on fraudulent transactions with checks, but they didn't have the figure to give because it was all messed in a huge bundle of fraud.
So that's very poor, because the defects in the faster payment system is what's gifted us authorised push payment fraud. In fact, with checks, you had legal protection against check conversion, didn't you?
Yeah, you did.
And now, authorised push payment fraud is conversion, payment into a differently named payee than the one in the payment mechanism.
Yeah.
And now we're wide open to check conversion, but it isn't the banks. The banks have simply transferred the risk of check conversion onto the customer through a system they designed themselves.
Yeah.
It's very poor. We've actually gone backwards in many, many respects for convenience. So we have higher fraud, we have higher cost. Now people are finally waking up to the deductions from face value on Visa, MasterCard payments.
Chargebacks.
We have higher cost, not necessarily that much quicker, because where a check would be made available 2 business days after the date of deposit, with a card payment, the merchant actually gets their money 3 business days later in the main. So we've actually gone slower, more expensive, more fraud.
Yeah.
Hey, is that progress?
No.
But it's all part and parcel of digitisation. And who are the benefits in terms of revenues, lower costs, lower risk? It's the banks.
And I think that's a very important point. what's portrayed as progress is often progress for a very narrow group.
Yes.
Often just the banks
And
and the
not the
card
rest
scheme.
of us.
And the public are left not suffering progress, but they actually are taking retrograde
Yeah,
steps.
that's right.
So coming on to the specifics of what we're seeing today, we in the Payment Choice Alliance, we went to YouGov in June and they conducted a survey for us, and we found, despite the fact that we keep hearing from UK Finance, which people think is somehow attached to the Treasury but is really just a trade union for the banks.
Yes.
They announce all the time, oh, cash is dying out, fewer transactions and so on, but they give the impression that you have to be a dinosaur to be using cash.
Yes.
Yet when we asked through YouGov, over 90% of people still use cash. Only
they do.
3% never use cash. So cash hasn't died out to the extent they're pretending, has it?
Well, no, it hasn't, but its usage is being hobbled deliberately.
Absolutely.
Via, fewer ATMs, inability to pay in, no cash collection by the banks at business premises, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
But yes, UK Finance would say that, wouldn't they? Because that's what their members want. And I think it's hard to imagine there isn't some kind of deal been done between the government and the banks to say, you can close all your ATMs and branches so that you can afford to build a new infrastructure for digital. If such a deal exists, it's a non sequitur, because through digital, with the card deductions, they get masses more revenue.
Absolutely.
So there is no case for allowing them to chop branches so they can afford to spend on digital. Non sequitur. Digital brings them loads more revenue from card deductions. So somehow those interconnections of whatever deal there is going, the PSR are acting. So their work, and I think work must go in inverted commas, because for 99% of the population it isn't work. Their work on the card business is concentrated on peripheral issues like how much does this sum up machine cost? How much information? Do you get the proper billing? Hold on a minute. That is by far the least big problem. So they look at all the peripheral problems, but not the elephant in the room. And I see we have Chester Zoo here, should I say the tiger in the room, which is the card payments swallowing anywhere between 1 and 8% of sales revenue. We know all about that. The average appears to be around 3%. And yet there's a European, residual EU law directive saying it should be 0.2 or 0.3%. What happened to that? Why hasn't that been policed?
It's never been 0.2 or 0.3.
It never has. And this is applicable law being circumvented.
But what we're finding, is that more and more of the public are realising what's happening. Just this morning, talking to people at this conference, even people who very rarely use cash were saying, we're not going to lose cash entirely, are we? But the reality is, if we're not very careful, we will. So when we asked these people in June with YouGov what they felt, the British public, 71% of them told us they want a Payment Choice Act. They want businesses to be compelled to accept cash. And we feel in the Payment Choice Alliance that if we get that act in place, everything else will cascade down from it, because then various solutions will have to be found, because all the businesses will then turn around and say, right, well, what are we going to do with our cash? Where the banks were saying, well, there won't be cash in future. Well, some businesses were happy to play along with that. Okay, there won't be cash. So we'll happily do what the banks want. Many businesses, of course, still do accept cash. But if the future is there has to be cash, then the solutions must be found.
I really think it's something radical is required like this, because otherwise the death by 1,000 cuts will continue. And I think perhaps if a year ago MPs had said, right, no more branch and ATM closures, then maybe this wouldn't have been necessary, but it's gone too far now.
They're kind of rushing now to get them closed, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And that a radical intervention is required. I've no doubt about that. So I fully support this.
And just one last comment, if you like. Before the last general election, the Labour Party announced that they would actually stop the banks closing their branches. Well, they didn't win the last election.
No.
Doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with them winning or losing, but the point is, ever since then, the banks have stepped up their closure
Of
programs,
course they
haven't
have, because they've got a deal, I think, with the government and the payment systems regulator that they're not going to stand in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, very negative. So fully support this. Needs to happen.
Well, thank you very much, Bob.
No, it's a
I'm
pleasure.
glad you're a great supporter of the public interest and
certainly
a
am.
great supporter of cash. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.